Okay, welcome back to the OBS, KPI, Skype, NDI tutorial for Craps Nation and live fantasy craps. Also useful for solo shooters, etc., etc. Live dice practice and all that good stuff. This part, we are going to look at the KPI, the key performance indicator, as George calls it. And I don't have a better name, so KPI it is. And you've probably seen the share links on Skype. Um, and if you haven't, find me on Skype, get the share link. Currently up to version 307. So when I first got the KPI from George, didn't really have a version number or anything else. It was just George's KPI. It's what he was using. He shared a copy with me. It included, most of this stuff. It included the board up here, counting for the all, tall, small. Got hit counters, counters to show you all the numbers that were being hit. Calculated the SRR and the SOR. Had a few of these gauges showing some various things. Had a nice little chart that showed, give you some, like here we're expecting 3 4s, but we got 6, so doing really good. Way too many 7s, but that's all right. That's what the chart shows. One of the big things that George had was this, the roll tracker. And when I started watching craps on YouTube, one of the most frustrating things was trying to follow along with YouTubers and their throws, because sometimes they wouldn't call them out, or I couldn't hear or understand what they were saying, or for whatever reason I would just get lost and I couldn't work my strategies. I found George's channel. Actually, I found Big AZ. He was using a really old version of the tracker, and he had mentioned George from CY. So eventually found George from CY and said, "Hey George, what do I need to get that tracker from you?" He said, "All you got to do is ask." So I asked, and he shared, and I got it. And one of the first things I decided was this right here, the horizontal roll history. I really didn't care much for it. I mean, it's functional. It does what it needs to do. Some people like it. In some scenes, it's very appropriate. But one of the first things I did with George's KPI is figured out how to make it vertical instead. And that seemed to be kind of popular with a few people. And so did that. Few weeks went by, and I noticed on Live Fantasy Craps that there was no fire bet. And fire bets are kind of, I guess not a lot of casinos are doing them, but some are, and some people still play the fire bet. It's a fun little side bet. Put $1 down, who knows? You might win 1,000 or more. I forget what. Yeah, the top. I think if you hit 6 points to the fire, 1,000 to 1. So, sure, why not? Let's try $1 on that, especially with shooters, with dice influencers, because who knows? They might actually survive the big red and make that 6 point fire bet. So I figured out a way to put the fire bet, get that working, and that was based on Andrew with Craps Down Under, his work getting the all tall small going. So that was pretty cool. Right after I introduced that, I noticed on the fantasy crap session that at least a couple of shooters were also doing the repeaters, and I thought to myself, repeaters, that shouldn't be too awful difficult. And honestly, it wasn't. It was actually fairly easy, except for the horn. That took a little more work to get the horn repeater to function properly. And so I added that. And in the process of doing that, I found that I could also add per shooter roll counts. And so that's this third line down here on what I call the KPI board on the board. So that all has to do with the current shooter. All right, without further ado, so you've seen the link shares. If not, find me. I will be more than happy to share this to you. When you first open it up, it will be view only. Don't even think about requesting edit access. I'm not going to give that to you. You just need to make your own copy. So click File, make a copy, and we'll just call it MyCraps KPI version 3.0.7. And when new versions, if I fix a bug or enhance the layout, make cosmetic changes and whatnot, I will bump these versions up and let most people know. So when in doubt, just go back to that share link and see if maybe it's been updated. So go ahead and hit OK. That'll save it to your Google Drive. And Google takes a minute to process all that. But here we go. Now we have your very own copy of the KPI. And to date, I have created 3 separate displays for the KPI. This is the one that I personally use. And if I zoom out on this a little bit, let's go to 75% so we can see almost the whole thing. I just like this chart better for stats. In this version of the display, I also move the roll counter up here to the top on the board. It makes it a little bit easier to manage and gets rid of that funky L shape over here on the vertical tracker that I like to use. All right, so we need to get your display. We also need to get your input. And we're going to start here. We're going to copy this URL right here. And it's important that you get on the tab that you're looking for. Actually, rewind just a little bit. The very first thing we need to do is to reset and get this script authorized to run on your account. And the first time you hit the reset, it just waits and waits and waits. It comes back, says authorization required. So we'll just continue. We'll sign in with our Google account. Go to advanced, and you do get these warnings. And we are just going to go to untitled project, unsafe, and then allow it. And then we can hit this reset button. I don't want to hit it yet, but we've authorized it. So now when we hit the reset, it will clear the input column, this yellow column here. All right, so we need to get our display into OBS. And here's the easiest way that I've found to do that. We're going to take this URL from your address bar, just highlight it, copy. We're going to come back to OBS, and this is where we left off with OBS. This is an overhead camera and a microphone, and that is it. So let's add to our scenes here. Let me make a little more room. We'll need it. And we're going to add a browser source. So click the plus sign, add a browser. We're going to call it KPI. We'll just call it the KPI sheet. All right. URL. We're going to paste in that URL that we copied out of the web browser. Width. Let's go ahead and make this full HD size 19. And we're going to need it kind of big. Height 1080. Everything else we can just leave alone, and that should load us right up. All right, here's the tricky part. OBS needs to sign into, you need to get OBS signed in or the browser signed in to your Google account. Unfortunately, let's see, we need to click the KPI sheet, right click, and then interact. That will allow us to interact with it. Oh, that's kind of tiny there. Put in your Google username, hit next, and ooh, that's tiny. But basically it's saying Google could not sign you in, and that's because Google does not recognize the OBS browser. So what we need to do is tell OBS to identify as something else. And and if you remember in the first video, first part of the tutorial, I mentioned that desktop shortcut, and we're going to go and take care of that right now. So let's minimize all our windows, get back to the desktop. Remember, I made a copy of the shortcut. And once again, we just added this argument to the command line. --user-agent equals super user. And that's going to change the way OBS communicates with its web browser. So let's relaunch OBS using that shortcut. And now Google is going to ask again for us to sign in. So right click on the source, select interact, put in your Google ID, next password. See if I didn't type it in right. And there we're logged in. All right. We are greeted with a message. This version of the browser you were using is no longer supported. Blah, blah, blah. Just dismiss that message. And once again, we are going to want to, oh, we're still interacting with this. So let's go up here to the view and let's get rid or let's go to full screen. That gets rid of a lot of the controls because we don't need those in this particular view. And go ahead and close this interaction. And this is what we're left with. All right. The components that we're going to bring in on this part of the tutorial are going to be the board and the tracker. And except I want the other, so we're going to need to interact with this one more time because I want this display right here. Now, there are a couple of ways to do this. The first we're going to do, so we need two. So we're going to copy it and then right click and we're going to paste. Now you could do this with two separate browser sources, but that puts extra load on your internet connection, your computer, OBS, etc. So by keeping it down to a single browser source and sharing that source with multiple things, it makes everything run just a little bit faster. So unfortunately, when we do this, if we crop one down to where we need it, it's going to crop the other because it is the same source. To get around that, we're going to add these two groups. We're going to just create each one as a group of one item. So this one, let's call it KPI board. And this one we're going to add to a group. And we'll call it KPI history. And just to make it a little less confusing, let's collapse those groups. Now we got the board and we got the history. On the board, we just click on filters and we're going to add a crop and pad filter. Okay. There's that. And this, doing a crop filter is a little annoying and tedious, but it's not horrible. We just need to put in some rough numbers here. 100 works. I think 100 works there. Right, probably about 350. Good enough for the moment. Bottom is going to be big. It's going to be 8. Let's go. Oh, 850 is too far, but that's okay. We use then these arrow keys to move it. Oh, 850 was actually almost perfect. And we're going to use these little arrow keys to fine tune this to get rid of all the magenta around it and make this crop as tight as we possibly can get it. You see, I'm just holding down this arrow key and that magenta on the right is slowly disappearing. And now we get rid of the magenta on the top. That should take care of that. And on the left. And close. So what we're left with is just your KPI board. And, oh, grab the wrong one. Oh, let's not grab our overhead camera. Let's go ahead and lock that in place. There we go. So we can move this around. We can check it out a little bit. We don't see any stray magenta around there. It looks like we got, what am I moving? Oh, that's the other KPI board, or the other KPI source. So let's just put that back up here in the corner. And now we can stretch this out to where we want it. And you notice it maintains its proportions. It's locked nice and tight against the top and the left-hand side of the screen. No slop whatsoever. And we'll get into more precise placement of these things later. All right, now we need our history. And we're going to take the vertical history out of here. So again, let's add a filter. Go into crop. Actually, before I do that, let me show you a different way you can crop this, but it's not as precise, but it is super quick and easy. Put your mouse down here on the red, and you can resize this, right? Okay. If you hold down the Alt key, then click, you notice I got a green line there, and that's for the crop. I can do the same thing over here and crop it there. Do the same thing here and crop it there. Down here on the bottom and crop it there. But you notice it is really hard to get rid of all that magenta. Now, you could add a chroma key. So let's do that instead. Filters on that. We'll just add that. Add chroma. Hit OK. Change from green to magenta. And you see all that goes away. A little bit too much gone away. So let's turn that sensitivity down, or the similarity down to the bare minimum. And that should do it right there. Usually somewhere around 175, 200, 225 is good. So we'll close that. And now you can see we have no border around it. But you can also see when we put that up there, it is really hard to get that lined up perfectly in the corner, which is, it's not really a showstopper. This is perfectly acceptable. You can do that. Not a problem whatsoever. My personal preference is to crop it all the way down to the pixel. That way I have precise control over what it's doing. But at this point in time, we've got the KPI integrated with OBS. What you see is what you stream. We're good to go. Now, next, you had a couple of ways to handle your input. And one of the ways I was doing this originally, when I first time I laid my hands on the KPI, what's this thing doing? Okay. What's that one? We'll get rid of that. We don't need it anymore. Is I was leaving the browser window over here, kind of hovering over the side of OBS, and it was kind of painful because you go to OBS to do something. Oh, where'd my browser window go? And then you got to click and you got to find it, and it's just a little bit clunky, but it does work. So come down here to the end. Let's roll a 12. Wow, that's a lot of rolls on a point of 6. That's an amazing 17 rolls and did not make the 6. That's all random data. I'm going to go ahead and put in a hard 6, get our point, and it shows up just that quick and easy. But again, it's really easy to lose that. So how do we get easy access to the input without being awkward and clunky? Well, take our URL from our input tab. We'll highlight, right click and copy. And OBS has a feature called Browser Docs. So you go to View, Docs, Custom Browser Docs. And we'll call it KPI Input. Here's your URL. We'll paste that in there and apply. OBS is already logged in. We do get a message saying the version of your browser you're using is no longer supported. Please upgrade to a whatever. So supported browser, and we'll just dismiss that. Controls are hidden, so we escape, and that's fine. Now we can take this browser doc and actually dock it into OBS. And you will get this little pop-up once. The window is too small to properly display the sheet, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Don't care. We don't need to see the full sheet. All we need is this. And if I could figure out a way to get rid of the rest of it, I would. Maybe somebody needs to create a crop plugin for the browser dock. I don't know. But there is your browser dock. And just like before, let's roll another hard way. Plug it in. Boom. There it is. Shows right up on the screen. About 2.5, I don't know, it's about 2-3 seconds. Wasn't too bad. And there you have it. You are now ready to live stream your craps practice with stats on your screen. Now, Bird Dog, you are not Bird Dog. Well, unless you are Bird Dog. But you can also now work with your KPI spreadsheet right here from the comfort of OBS while you're doing everything else. And if we come here, last tab over is the setup and reference. And let's say it's just me shooting today. So I can get rid of George, Bird Dog, say bye-bye. Now, I'm the only shooter. We're not doing live fantasy craps, so let's just do live craps practice. How about that? Come back to our input. Let's resize that browser. Let's go ahead and run our reset. It's running the script. We've already authorized the script, so it's running. And you can see it just cleared everything. We're reset back to 0. We're ready for come out. Yo, how about that? That works. So once again, you are ready to shoot. You're ready to stream and share your roles with your audience. In the next part of the tutorial, we're going to talk about getting Skype incorporated to allow guests to come onto your stream, and you can either just have them pop up, you know, a little face on the corner of your screen or something to talk to, or show their table. And we'll see how that we can accomplish that this is part 2. Part 3 is just going to be the basics of Skype and getting that integrated. And probably the part after that, we're going to get into some advanced layout, scene design, and go from there. So until then, peace out. May the dice be kind. Like, subscribe, etc. Yada, yada. And we will see you at Live Fantasy Craps.